Some of you may not know this, but before I was a Kinophile, I was a gamer. Yep, I was part of the most oppressed group in the world. I remember growing up in the 90s playing games like Freddy Fish and Spy Fox on my PC, and when my parents weren't around, I'd play my dad's copies of Quake 2 and Doom. At the age of 8, I got an original Xbox for Christmas, and my first two games I was given for this console were Jet Set Radio Future and Halo Combat Evolved. I fell in love with both. Throughout my adolescence, I loved gaming. Some of my favorite games as a kid were Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and all the Halo games. As a teenager, I got more into action role-playing games and immersive sims.
My new partner, J.C. Denton. Don't tell me you're going to wear those sunglasses during a night operation.
My vision is augmented.
I may really only have time for movies at this point in my life, but occasionally I'll make myself some time to patrol the Mojave in Fallout New Vegas. I'm saying all of this so that you know I have a love for video games. Which is why I hate that video game movies f***ing suck. They suck almost without fail. The good video game movies like Detective Pikachu or Sonic are mid at best. I had a person tell me that, yeah, Sonic isn't a great movie, but it's amazing when compared to other video game movies. So what gives? Why are video game movies cursed to be terrible? I have a few theories. For one, the way games and films tell stories is vastly different. Movies are curated experiences. Every shot is of something the director wants you to see. Something can be in the scene and you might never know it because the director could willingly have it out of frame. To give a clear example of this taking place, think of almost any horror movie where the camera moves or cuts to reveal the killer behind the character. Nothing about a movie is interactive. The audience has no control over what happens in the film. The movie was scripted, shot, and edited, and will be the exact same movie until the end of time, or until a distributor decides to no longer release it. This isn't the case for games. In most games, modern 3D games at least, the player controls the camera. We choose what we want to see. The world is there for us to explore. Now, some games are linear and thus more curated than more open-world games, but player interactivity runs across the board for all games because they wouldn't be games if they weren't interactive. This is getting to my first point. Interactivity changes how stories are told and what kind of stories can be told. Games require gameplay. Yes, even David Cage's shitty choose-your-own-adventure style of movie games technically have gameplay. Gameplay is the reason we play games. If we wanted to sit back and watch a story unfold, well, then we just watch a movie. So how do video game stories work? The most common technique in my experience is to show cinematic cutscenes at key points in levels or missions. Player control is taken away to concisely show key plot or character points and move the story forward. That's not to say that no storytelling happens outside of cutscenes. I'd venture that most stories in games happen during gameplay. Why do I say this? Because if you were to watch a compilation of all the cutscenes in a game, there will usually be very jarring cuts and gaps in the story. And because games are comprised of, well, gameplay, most games have much longer runtimes than movies. A game like Call of Duty might only have a 5-hour-long campaign, but you can easily sink 100 hours into something like The Witcher 3. Now, consider that most studios don't want to make movies that are longer than 3 hours. A movie that's based on, let's say, Halo, can't just show Master Chief jumping around like a 10-year-old on a sugar rush, while headshotting grunts with a battle rifle as confetti pops out of their heads for hours on end. That would be boring. So how does a movie studio translate these gameplay elements to the screen? Taking away the interactivity eliminates most of the fun. The thrill of chainsawing enemies in the game Doom is much greater than the mild amusement of seeing a character in the movie Doom use the chainsaw, even if it's a weird first-person POV that was used for that segment. Most films operate by having A, B, and possibly even C stories. Films can easily cut through time and control pacing by intercutting between simultaneous narratives. Since most games just have you play as one character, then the filmmakers have to add in story elements while subtracting others, often to bad results. Side note, the film in recent memory that felt the most like a video game was 1917, which was based on history, not on a game obviously, but the director, Sam Mendes, claimed that the movie's style was inspired by Red Dead Redemption 2. But just because adapting a game to a movie is messy doesn't mean that it can't be done. I'm not saying that at all. Every kind of adaptation is messy. Most literary adaptations can feel like Cliff Notes versions of the books. Adaptations of plays can fall into the trap of feeling like film stage plays, rather than something cinematic. But there have been many more cases of successful theater and literary adaptations than there have been of video game adaptations. Not that that bar is very high. It's not, it's practically right on the ground. A reality we have to also acknowledge is that most, if not all, of video game movies are either made by a committee or they're made as low-effort cash grabs. IP is king in New Hollywood, and studios know that people will pay to see things they recognize. It's much easier to advertise a thing that everybody already knows about than sell people on something new, because new is scary. Maybe the studios or the directors don't care about making good video game movies because they know they'll sell, so why put in the effort? A lot of corporate collaborations can be messy and result in films being watered down in order to appeal to both the film studios and the owners of the IP. And video game movies are not just vulnerable to this, they're frequent victims. To use the Assassin's Creed movie as an example, even though it was distributed by 20th Century Fox, now Disney, Ubisoft had a heavy hand in its development and most likely demanded that it be as boring as the games to appeal to Assassin's Creed fans. And then some video game movies are just made by crazy whack jobs who could never make good movies to save their lives. Just look at Uwe Boll. Look at him. Name one good film he's made. I'll give you 5 seconds. If you named any one of his films, you're wrong. Please don't beat me up, Uwe. As one last point, one last squirt of gasoline into the dumpster fire that is video game adaptations, one last little possibility as to why they suck. What if stories and characters in games just aren't that good? Before you get mad, ask yourself, do you skip cutscenes when you replay games? I know I do. Even the games whose stories and characters I like the most, Deus Ex for example, still have goofy stories and would have to undergo many changes in order to be accepted as something serious by cinema audiences. It might have to be changed so much that it would no longer resemble its original self. I can only speak for myself, but even the greatest video games have never emotionally affected me as much as a great movie has, unless you count me raging at my 700th death in Dark Souls as the game moving me on an emotional level. The stories are there to enhance the gameplay, not the other way around. Most game stories, in my experience at least, also feel extremely derivative of movie stories. Deus Ex obviously takes notes from Blade Runner. Ghost of Tsushima is so influenced by Kurosawa films that they allow you to play in a Kurosawa mode. Alan Wake is basically Twin Peaks the video game. Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 are love letters to Western movies, and Uncharted was inspired by Indiana Jones. Let's think about that last one for a second. Spielberg made the Indiana Jones movies in the 80s. Come the 2000s, Naughty Dog makes their version of Indiana Jones, but as a video game. Now, in 2022, Hollywood is releasing an Uncharted movie. It's kind of like a game of telephone between the industries. With each new iteration, something is lost. So with this Uncharted movie, Hollywood is making a soulless adaptation of a quasi-adaptation of one of their properties. Someone go resurrect Baudrillard. I think he would love this. It makes sense that most video game stories in AAA games are inspired by movies. Their creators grew up watching movies. Hideo Kojima tweets about literally every film he watches, and he watches a lot of films. I believe that's led to the rise of games as cinematic experiences. We've gotten a handful or more of the prestigious third-person cinematic Sony action games in the last decade, along with David Cage's interactive wannabe movie-like pretentious garbage.
Jason!
But to me at least, a lot of these game stories just feel like pale imitations of the movies that inspire them. Maybe it's because they have to fit these stories into Military Shooter 728, or the game operates like a choose-your-own-adventure, so that the writers have to write so many different options and pathways, resulting in the scripts generally not being as tight. Sometimes the gameplay even contradicts the stories. This happens so much that there's a word for it: ludonarrative dissonance. A famous case of ludonarrative dissonance in a game series was with Uncharted, as Nathan Drake, the lovable rogue in the cutscenes, mercilessly kills hundreds upon hundreds of people in the gameplay. Funnily enough, in Uncharted 4, the game awards the player with a trophy called ludonarrative dissonance when the player kills 1,000 enemies. For a more classic example, just think of the case where your custom character shows up in a cutscene and just ruins all suspension of disbelief. I get that writing for games is probably very difficult to do well, and narrative games are still in their infancy, historically speaking. 100 years ago, films were still silent, so I have hopes that games can improve as an art form. Even though I haven't been impressed with just about any game's story, I have really enjoyed the lore and world building in many games. Dark Souls, The Elder Scrolls, and The Witcher all have great lore that grounds you in their worlds and makes you feel like you are part of them. This is getting to my solution for video game adaptations. I'm not here to tell a couple billion-dollar industries how to run their business. I don't have $1 billion, so chances are they're doing something better than me. All I'm doing is offering a little consultation. Let games be games and movies be movies. We love games because we get to play them. Even in the most scripted of games, players can create their own stories. Each playthrough is unique. A game is both the painting and the canvas. The scripted stories might usually be lame, but that's not what draws us to playing games. Through games, we've been given access to many worlds: Hyrule, Rapture, the Bureau of Control, and many others. Considering how messy it is to outright adapt games, why not just make movies that take place in the same universes as some of these beloved games? Resident Evil kind of did this until that franchise was run into the ground. I would say Uwe Boll did this with his movies, but only because most of his movies are so damn stupid that I can't imagine the games he was adapting were that bad. The only exception was Postal, which, despite being objectively a bad movie, still made me laugh, and it captured a bit of that Postal 2 spirit. But let's not dwell on the masterworks of Boll, and instead think of some good possibilities for what can be done. A movie in Skyrim could be really cool, and I'm sure Todd Howard would re-release that movie in as many formats as possible. I'd also pay to see a Denis Villeneuve-directed movie in the Deus Ex universe that doesn't have anything to do with J.C. Denton or Adam Jensen. A Guillermo del Toro-directed BioShock movie could also be super cool. I hope the new Fallout TV series takes this approach. If it does, then it has a chance of being decent, but I'm not holding my breath. I just think that gamers shouldn't have to have a game turned into a movie or a show to feel justified in their love for gaming. Who cares if someone from Epstein's Black Book made a shitty movie based on your favorite game? Books, plays, paintings, photography, and literally every other form of art didn't need films to elevate them to some higher tier of culture. If games are going to be taken seriously as an art form, it's not going to be because of their relation to movies, but in spite of their relation to movies. So what's your opinion on all of this? Are video game movies doomed to fail, or is there a way to make them good? Also, while editing this, the Cuphead show released, which I heard was pretty good, but I haven't checked it out yet, so I can't really give my opinion on it. Anyways, if you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.